The Menendez brothers, at the same time as their second trial was happening in Beverly Hills, my incident happened in the East Coast. Part of cutting the deal that I did was about trying to avoid the media attention and keeping everything as quiet as possible because of the Menendez brothers. And when my dad first came to this country, he did like a rotation. He did his residency up in Ohio, and that's where he met my mother, my biological mother. This was at Riverside Hospital. He was a doctor. She was a nurse. And there was a big pattern, doctors and nurses.
Yeah.
Workplace romance. So my mom became pregnant. And at the time that she became pregnant, my father was training as a paratrooper down in Fort Bragg. And he insisted that she has to marry him. And she didn't want to. She refused. So my father, in doing this training, he told my mother that if she didn't agree to marry him, the next time when they were doing training and he jumped out of the airplane, he would refuse to pull the cord.
Okay.
And he would just fall to his death. And then, maybe she could get the insurance money or something. But that would show her how serious he was, that he wouldn't let her out of his control. Like she had to agree to marry him because she was pregnant with me.
Right.
And so he told her he would free fall to his death, or he gave her another option. Besides getting married to him, she could also choose to get an abortion. And she refused all of the above. And that didn't go well. And the next time he was able to visit Ohio and visit her, because he kept going back and forth between Ohio and North Carolina for training. The next time he visited her, he brought medical supplies. And he told her that he would offer to perform the abortion on her himself.
Jesus. Okay.
And she refused. And so he left to do some more training. And then during that period of time that he was away, she overdosed. She tried to commit suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills. And she was found by some family members and taken to the hospital. And after a couple of days, she recovered. And he came back up to Ohio to check in on her and found out about all this. And then within about a week after that, I'm sure they had some conversation, and I don't know what they agreed on, but about a week after that, they got married. Once I was born, my father forbid my mother from breastfeeding me. Interesting detail. And so what she did is she started bottle feeding me, but then shortly after the formula, so she switched over to filling the bottle with Pepsi Cola, and then later on with Kool-Aid. So from the point that I was, like an infant up to when I was about 2 years old or so, I was bottle fed on Pepsi Cola and Kool-Aid. And I have a pretty good memory. So I actually remember back to being in a crib, being a little, 2-year-old kid, drinking the bottle of Pepsi Cola and Kool-Aid. So I found I've been hooked on sugar and caffeine literally since I was in the crib.
All right.
And one of the other things that happened is all my baby teeth ended up crumbling out of my mouth because of all the sugar. So they didn't just fall out like baby teeth do. You could kind of like pick at them and they would just break apart because of all the sugar. And so I ended up having a full plate of dentures when I was like 2 years old. We called it a turtle, but it was like sometimes when kids see orthodontists, they get a retainer that they put up that helps to correct their teeth. So I actually had a full plate of like my top plate that sort of snapped in with fake teeth. And I still have that. It's like in my little treasure chest. We called it my turtle. Because my dad was such a workaholic, he just wasn't home. He didn't connect with my mom. They stopped having relations. And my father still had a tremendously high drive, very strong sex drive. And he preferred to compulsively act out by himself. So a lot of self-touch.
Right.
Before the divorce, my mom would abandon us, him and myself. She'd leave for like a week at a time to make a statement, to really drive home the point that she wanted him to be present. She wanted him to be involved. She wanted him to be involved in my life. So she would just pack up and leave for a week and just abandon us. And so during those periods of time, my dad just cooked scrambled eggs and hot dogs. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was, scrambled eggs and hot dogs for every meal while she was gone. And then they would make up and she would come back And then after a while, it would happen again. So it was pretty rocky. And eventually it got to the point where they did divorce. After the divorce, my father threatened suicide again because he didn't want to lose her, or he didn't want to lose that anchor, and he didn't want his life disrupted, because I think he still wanted to have some secure part of his life while he was out doing all these other things in the world. And my mother just wasn't having it. She was not going to take him back. So my father, he moved to an apartment very close by to this house that he had first bought where we lived. So he ends up moving to an apartment nearby. And my mom used to share with me about how afraid she was because of how nearby he lived. And that ends up coming up later on. And she started bringing all these guys home. All of them were alcoholics, like dozens of guys. And every one of these alcoholic guys that she would bring home, almost all of them were older than she was. So just looking back, it's like this pattern of looking for the older alcoholic man to connect with, just like Pedo Joe, the older alcoholic stepfather who assaulted her. So I told you how a lot of these guys that were coming into my mom's home, I was supposed to call him my uncle. And then she began involving me in her personal sex life with these guys.
How old are you at this point?
Less than 10.
Okay.
And what I realized is she was actively grooming me for transactions. I want to be cautious how I say this.
Yeah, I understand.
But she was starting to transact me with these different men. And this is her start of her grooming me. And so she started pimping me out to these men. And she started having me perform certain acts on these men while she instructed me on how to do it. And this is something that happened with a lot of the guys that she brought home. And there was at least one time where one of these guys and her started taking explicit photographs of me as a younger person. Back then we had Polaroid cameras, and so they took a lot of Polaroids. Very explicit and very vulnerable photos, put it like that. And I don't know whatever happened to those photos, but she and whatever guy, did whatever they did with them. And while this was going on for a couple of years is when she bought her first handgun. She bought a .357 Magnum. And when she bought it, she took me into the living room, emptied all the bullets out of the chamber, and then had me dry fire the gun towards the floor to practice using this weapon inside the house. And she would then tell me in a very detailed way about her stepfather, Chomo Joe,
Right.
and how he would assault her. And she would tell me these stories of how she was assaulted while she was having me dry fire this empty weapon towards the floor. And for me, I would, just as a young person, I would just get so angry hearing about Pedo Joe and how he hurt my mother. I would just fixate it on it. Like as a kid, I would think about it, after she would tell me, I'd think about it at school. It just kept running through my mind. And I kept thinking about how I wanted to bring justice and vengeance to Joe if I could find him. And so I realize now that's rage baiting. It's like she was rage baiting me into doing this, but I didn't even realize that's what was happening.
I mean,
and also kind of like programming me to do this.
I was going to say she's also doing the same thing.
Same thing.
Okay.
And when I spoke with her about, talked with her, like the way she would always say is, well, it's different because she was present and that made it okay. So it's not like what happened to her when she was growing up, where her mother brought in these guys and then left, and the guys just did whatever they wanted to do to her.
Right.
See, this was different because my mom was there to supervise these activities, so that made it safe and that made it okay. And as a kid, I thought, okay, I guess that's right.
Right.
So it's like gaslighting 101.
Yeah, you don't know anything.
Right? I didn't know anything. So I just went along with the program. And at the same time, it's like she was programming me to, use the weapon for these people. At the same time that she was engaged in this very thing that she's training me to lash out towards. And she also was telling me that she didn't feel safe with my father living nearby. So years later, when my mom bought her next gun, a .38 Special. She did the exact same thing, taught me how to dry fire it, told me stories of Pedo Joe. And as a kid, I used to collect comic books. And from a very early age in my teens, I just became obsessed with this idea of becoming a vigilante, like Batman or somebody, where I wanted to bring street justice and vengeance to the bad guys. And I started thinking about what would it look like if I grew up to travel around the country or the neighborhood to find pedos and chomos and take justice on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I told you how my dad at this time was also dating all these women. He was a man on a mission, collecting all this pornography. He had these Samsonite brown hard shell suitcases down in the basement, like 6 of them, absolutely packed with just the hardest core stuff. There was also porn that involved animals. It was wild, all this stuff. And as a kid, I would hunt through his home and find this stuff. It's like looking for treasure. And sometimes I would steal it and give it to my mom's boyfriends. And sometimes I'd give it to the other kids in the Cub Scouts at the time. And
horrible.
it's just wild.
Okay.
And, and this back when you could order like Playboy and Penthouse through the mail.
Yeah.
I mean, he had magazines in every bathroom in the cabinet under the sink, every bathroom. He'd have it lying out on the kitchen table, on the dining room table. Like
It's an addiction.
It's
Yes,
just an
that's
addiction.
issue.
He was completely out of control and off the hook. And then later on, when the Betamax came out, the precursor to VHS, we would go to the local videotape store and he'd get a video for me and then he'd get an adult video for himself. So all this stuff was going on. Nowadays, I'd look at him, I'd consider him to be a sexaholic.
Wasn't a thing back then.
Wasn't a thing back then, yeah. But, there's treatment for it now. And while I was also pretty young, again in the 70s, I used to have really long, shaggy hair. So he would pull my hair back in a ponytail and call me girl names. Mm-hmm. So I realized at some point that, as an adult looking back, that both my dad and my mom were like purposely trying to feminize me for whatever the reasons, right? When I lived with my mom, our family time growing up was in her bedroom, laying on her bed, her boyfriend, me, watching together. Like that was our family time. And then afterwards, stuff would happen.
Right.
She also told me this thing, which always kind of stuck with me. And I've tried to like pull it out of my consciousness. But she used to tell me over and over again that if somebody is straight, they're only going to get 50% of the love in the world. And if they decide to be gay,
Right.
they're only going to get 50% of the love in the world. So what I should do, and what she wanted me to do, is to be bisexual. Because if you're bisexual, you get 100% of the love in the world. So what this was 100% gaslighting.
Right.
Like just crazy stuff. So my mom turned our house into a trap house. We had all these alcoholics, drug addicts coming through. She started renting out our basement, sometimes our living room. All these guys were staying. And one of the guys was a drug dealer. And he would stash his Christmas snow in our basement. And then I would play a game of like looking through the basement trying to find this. He was also, he got high on his own supply and ended up going through a drug treatment program. I think at the time it was called Second Genesis. So because he was going through drug treatment, and this is during the early 80s, they would let the participants, when they had to do urinalysis, go collect a cup and then bring it in.
Right.
So that's when my mom would tell me that I was expected to provide clean urines for this guy. And whenever he wanted it, to pee in a cup so he would have clean urine and he could turn it in and pass his test. And there was a point where I refused to do this. And then, I got blacklisted, hell to pay. She also told me that she had this handgun, this new one, this .38, just in case any of these alcoholic or addict guys that were always coming through the house, whether they were her boyfriends or they stayed there to just live there, if any of them ever got out of hand, she told me where the gun was. She showed me how to use it, and she told me to go ahead and shoot her boyfriends if needed, if necessary. Then they sent me to a fundamentalist Baptist school from 7th grade to 12th grade, like very religious, stopping just short of handling snakes, like super religious. And I felt like every day I lived a lie. I was living this crazy life at home with her, with my dad, and then at school, we had to like memorize verses out of the holy book and pray. And it was making me crazy trying to live this life. It's like I felt like I was becoming schizophrenic, trying to live all these multiple lives and be this one person over here and another person over there. And I never felt safe. I always felt like people were going to find out the secret. And if they found out the secret, it would be my fault because I was participating in all this stuff, not my parents. And at home, clothing was optional and mostly discouraged. And when I was home, after school, I would just eat sugar compulsively and watch a lot of TV, a lot of cartoons. I had no friends. I started gaining a lot of weight, totally addicted to sugar, and just trying to compulsively eat to fill the emptiness. And I was struggling with a lot of anxiety and fear, especially around going to sleep. I was afraid I would get attacked while I was asleep, and I was afraid of having to wake up the next morning to another day of this craziness. So my mom started giving me sleeping pills. When I visited my dad, he started giving me other types of medication, usually Fiorinol, which is a prescribed barbiturate that has a couple other things mixed in. But when I was with her, she'd give me one thing. When I was with him, he'd give me something else. So my parents were my drug dealers, both of them. And this continued for several more years until I was about 16. I was a real late developer. I'd gotten pretty fat. I was a latchkey kid. I'd come home from school. I'd pretend to be on this religious program and come home to this craziness, compulsively eating, gaining all this weight. I had no friends. I couldn't talk to anybody. I couldn't reveal what was going on, kept it all to myself. I just lived like this scavenger, and I was home by myself, and I was probably pretty malnourished because I just didn't know how to eat or take care of myself. I was always depressed. And also around 16, I made a conscious choice that I wanted to stop participating in all this sexual activity in my family. And I caught hell for that. Like, they came at me with all these reasons like, oh, well, you're not going to be a part of this family anymore. And if you don't cooperate, we can't include you. And don't you love us? And yeah, you could pretty much figure that out. The peer pressure, like the worst peer pressure I've ever experienced was from my family. It was just intense. I also had become really fixated on self-harm, deleting myself. Mm-hmm. I didn't see a future for myself. I didn't think I'd live to be 18 or 20 or whatever, because every day was just the same thing, and it kept getting worse, and all this pressure and all this craziness in my family. And I did whatever I could. I used whatever I could to try to black out the pain and the sense of hypocrisy and just this crazy lifestyle that I was a part of with my family. And when I was 17, I was kicked out of that religious school. And my dad got really pissed off because my mom wasn't, enforcing school. So he took me, I went to live with him. And that's where the things started happening between me and my stepmother. For a few years leading up to that, my stepmom had been making sexual advances towards me very slowly and methodically, like a predator. And because my dad chooses the same woman to marry, I already said she's a morbidly obese addict sexual predator. She became much more aggressive with me and would start making these rules that I was not allowed to lock the door if I went into the bathroom or to take a shower or to go into my room. Every door had to stay open because they had to do wellness checks on me, and they had to be able to have access to peek in on me. And in the morning, my stepmom insisted she wanted to be the one to wake me up. So she'd crawl into bed with me. She'd kiss me, fondle me, grab my morning wood, and whenever I would refuse, she would go to my dad and say how I'm being disobedient and I'm not cooperating, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if she would explicitly say what I was doing or not doing. She probably was just framing it like, oh, he's always fighting against me. And then my dad would just bring the heat on me, like, you got to do exactly what she says. I don't care what it is, blah, blah, blah. Then my dad allowed me to start seeing a psychotherapist. He actually sent me to see a therapist because I wasn't adjusting to his house and his rules. So I started seeing this therapist, and it took a while to warm up and let all this stuff out. And as soon as I started talking about it, this therapist is like, you got to get out of that house. You're 17. I was scheduled to graduate high school early, a year early. And she's like, we need to figure out an exit strategy. We got to get you out of that house. And she believed, and she convinced me to believe that if I could just leave the house, get into school, university, I could leave it all behind, start over, start fresh, and live my own life, and I'd be safe. And then there was a point where she invited my dad in for a session and my mom in for a session, my biological mom. And as soon as we started talking about this stuff, my dad shut it all down. I wasn't allowed to see this therapist anymore. All that was over. From 1989 to 1991, I moved out and I did go to college. I went to a couple colleges. I went to University of Maryland, College Park. I went to University of Louisville. I went to University of Kentucky. I ended up going into the architecture program for College Park and also University of Kentucky at the same time. I wanted to be an architect or some kind of artist. Basically also did a lot of art school stuff. I was very creative. But what I found is even at college, my eating disorder was out of control. Whenever I could drink or, smoke things or do things, I would do that. And I just couldn't keep it together. I was really unstable. I had no sense of myself. I was struggling with a lot of PTSD. There was nobody I could talk to. I couldn't let people close. And, and in college, then there's women, and I was going through this awakening, like, oh my God, I want to get sexually active, but how can I disclose what I've been through? And I was also really afraid of myself because of what I'd been through. It's like, oh my God, am I going to turn into some kind of monster? So I just didn't know what to make out of all that. Meanwhile, my mom's mental illness was getting worse. There were times when I was at college, I'd call her up to check in on her, and she'd tell me that she was so depressed she had that 38 out on the bed next to her, and she was thinking about self-deleting. And I tried to talk her down, on the phone. So I just knew that was going on, and I couldn't take it. All this stuff was going on in my head. And after each school year, when I would come back home to spend the summer at my dad's house, things would resume with my stepmom, where she'd start pressuring me aggressively and all these sexual advances. And so like all this stuff, it just kept continuing. It was coming to a head, and I was getting older, and my fuse was getting shorter, and their pressure was getting greater. And I couldn't see this going on any longer. And I knew I was failing to thrive, and I decided I was going to die by my own hand. I just didn't know how I would do it. I also thought that if I didn't do it, my dad would, because he was a trained killer and a doctor, Dr. Rambo. And he was in our fights and his screaming at me. He would say things like, I'm going to cut you out of this family. I don't want anything more to do with you. I'm going to get rid of you. So he was using all that kind of language that it wasn't overtly violent, but it was communicating this everything that he had been showing me this whole time. And I felt like I could read between the lines, and I'm like, this guy's going to kill me. And I started to think like, it's going to be some kind of showdown here or something. And I thought, I'm the weak link. Everybody else is managing to function with their dysfunction. I'm the one who can't function.
Your mom doesn't sound like she's functioning.
Yeah, true. Right.
Yeah.
Like it was all falling. It just felt like everything was falling apart.
Right.
And so I really was pretty clear that time was short for me.
Right.
So summer in 1991, I had to return back from University of Kentucky architecture school, living with my dad, my stepmom. Things were tense. I was living in fear on a daily basis. We had fights. He was telling me I had to do exactly what my stepmom wanted me to do. And this thought came in my mind. I realized he's pimping me out to her the same way my mom pimped me out to these older men. And it just like sealed it, this history of betrayal and neglect and just being devalued. And then he told me he was not going to let me go back to college. And I had already decided inside I didn't think I could last another year just because emotionally I couldn't take it anymore.
Right.
So he was saying I wasn't going back. I knew I wasn't going back. And I had no idea what was going to happen next. And I didn't want to stick around to find out. And I had nowhere to go. I had nobody to talk to. And nothing I was able to smoke, drink, or pop could take away the pain of a broken soul, a broken heart, and a broken life. So what I decided to do is to go to my mom's house or her apartment and steal her 38 and as many of those Percocet that I could. And she had hundreds, maybe 1,000 of them. And I wanted to get messy. I wanted to take all these pills and then delete myself and to make it a really sloppy mess. And I wanted my dad to find it because I wanted to show him it was his fault that this is what came of my life. Like, and that this happened because of him, you know. So at that time, you know, there's this thing, Stockholm syndrome, where people overly have this misplaced loyalty to their abusers, and you know, and the level is
super common.
It's crazy.
Look at the Elizabeth. I always think of this smart. Yeah. I always think of her.
Crazy.
It was
kidnapped and
within a few months. Yeah, and she's arguing with the police.
Yeah, saying no, this is her parents and fighting to stay with them and
insane,
crazy.
It seems like you know people always think that that never happened to me. Really, because it happens all the time. I'm assuming it would happen to you.
Yeah.
It happened to me. It would happen to anybody that was in that situation.
Yeah.
And if you kind of break it down, it makes sense because this is a person who has complete control of you, but they're also protecting you. And I think that people's psyches are much more fragile than they think. It reminds me of which makes me think of World War II, where everybody thinks they would be a part of the rebellion, in Germany, and that they would be a part of the secret underground fighting the Nazis. They wouldn't be a part of the guys that were rounding up the Jews and executing them. No. The guys that were rounding up the Jews were typically shopkeepers, accountants. Like they were just average middle-class people.
Who feed right into the narrative and they just go right along with it.
Because if you don't, you see people being dragged out of their house.
And it's either them or that. Yeah.
And they very quickly stepped in the line. You always think, I would never. Yeah, you would.
Yeah. So this is about the story of the Emperor's New Clothes,
okay,
where the moral of the story is the lie mutually agreed upon, where everybody is in on the lie, but they realize
nobody talks about it
because they realize it's in their own self-interest. Sometimes out of self-preservation, sometimes because they got skin in the game. Mm-hmm. But everybody keeps the storyline going and keeps the narrative going because they're in on the lie. And then you have the one person who says, "Hey, the emperor's naked," and they point it out. And what happens is that person gets dragged out into the woods and stoned to death because
kill the messenger.
Keep your damn mouth shut. You ruin it for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And so I realized that that's what I'd gotten myself into, and I just hated it. I hated it. I didn't want to be that person. I hated the situation. I wanted to fight back. I realized, like, I had subjugated myself. I'd grown up to be subjugated. I gave away my power to my parents and everybody else, and I just had nothing for myself. And all throughout my incarceration, people kept challenging me. Why didn't you just run away? Why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just walk away? Why didn't you do this, that, and the other? Like, I was freaking brainwashed to stay, and I had zero belief in my own competency. And I probably wasn't competent. Like, competency is something people have to develop and skills they have to build. But I didn't have the tool set, the skill set, or the mindset to break away. And right in that weekend, leading up to it, my dad rented a movie called New Jack City. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
New Jack City is about a drug dealer in New York City in the crack epidemic in the 1980s. He'd been selling drugs and terrorizing his community. Then he got arrested. He got a good lawyer. He manipulated his way out of being punished. He got a slap on the wrist. He walks out of court high-fiving all of his homeboys, but he doesn't realize an elderly man from that community whose family had been wrecked by these drugs wanted revenge, and he snuck a weapon into the courthouse. And as the drug dealer was coming down the steps high-fiving his buddies, the elderly man pulled out the weapon and right on the courthouse steps and got that street justice. Mm-hmm. So I'd watched that 3 times leading up to that weekend.
Nino Brown.
Yeah. And, So I went over to my mom's house or her apartment in Baltimore City. I took her gun. I took 2 bottles of Percocet, 100 bottles in each. I had 200 Percocet pills.
100 pills.
100 pills in each bottle, right? 200 total. So I had the gun, I had the pills, and then I returned back to my dad's house. And I thought, you know what? How am I going to find a place to get messy? So what happened, and trigger warning, this is going to talk about the crime. So I got to his house. I let myself in. It was very quiet in the house. I went upstairs to my bedroom, and I was sitting on my bed. The house was completely quiet. I thought maybe they had gone out. They had 2 cars. I thought they had gone out, maybe to a restaurant or something, my dad and my stepmom. And I was there sitting on my bed. I had the bottle of pills. I had the handgun. It was loaded. And I'm just trying to think about, like, which do I do first, and where do I point for the spray when I paint the wall? Like, how messy can I get it? And I'm like sitting there having that critical moment. And then I hear a noise. And then I hear some rustling. And it turns out both my dad and my stepmom had been taking a nap in their bedroom. And they just woke up. And then first my dad comes out. And as he walks towards the stairs, he walks past my bedroom. He sees me sitting on my bed. And he's a little kind of surprised that I'm home. And he says, come downstairs. We're going to watch a movie. Let's watch New Jack City. Then he goes downstairs. And my stepmother comes out, and she walks from her bedroom over to the stairs, walks past my bedroom, sees me, tells me to come downstairs. She's going to fix dinner. So neither of them saw what I had, the weapon or the pills, and they just kind of took it in stride that I was home unexpectedly. And they went downstairs, and I sat on my bed, and I had that moment where I thought, this is it, this is the end. And something inside of me snapped. And I got really cold. And it's like that training took over, that I was going to go after and get rid of the chomos and the pedos and the sex offenders. Like something inside me, just like a switch flipped. And it's like I turned into the Terminator, an assassin. And I got up with a weapon. I left the pills behind. I walked down the stairs. First, I walked into the kitchen, and my stepmother was standing in the kitchen with her back turned towards me. She had a pot on the stove. The fire was underneath the pot. She was doing some cooking. And I looked over to my left, and my father was sitting on the couch. He had just turned on the TV. And I looked back at my stepmom. I had the gun pulled on my side. And she turned around and looked at me. And that's when I raised the weapon. And shots were fired. And I shot twice. I don't want to go into how grisly this is, but these are the most horrific things I've ever seen. The smell of the gunpowder in the air and the smoke from the gun discharging. I had no ear protection, and this is inside of an enclosed house. I immediately went deaf. I lost my hearing. I still don't have full hearing in one of my ears. And I just fired twice. I had my stepmother, and it was horrible. It was horrible what I did to her. And she dropped. And then my dad had looked and was just staring, and I turned towards him, and he jumped up and ran at me. And then he turned and tried to run upstairs because he's an ex-military special forces Green Beret. He had a weapon in the house. Right. So I started to chase him. And as he was starting to run away, he turned around because I started firing randomly towards him. And what I found out later is one of the shots did hit him and entered in through his back and ricocheted around inside of him. But he was probably just running on adrenaline at that point, and he ran. And then he stopped. He turned around and charged at me, maybe thinking he knew that if he kept running away and I kept pursuing, he was going to be at a disadvantage, I guess.
Right.
And so he turned and he figured his chances were better if he just tried to go at me directly. And when he ran at me directly, that's when I unloaded a couple. And it's weird because in that kind of moment, it's like time stands still and things get weird. And I felt very disassociated from my body. Like I was hovering right around here, watching it all take place.
Right.
And it seemed like I shot a dozen times when the weapon I used was a 5-shot.
Yeah.
And the last shot that I, sent off, it hit him right in this area, and it tore this whole part of his neck out, and it was just horrible. And he fell, sort of scrambling. He grabbed a piece of furniture and pulled it over and just dropped. And I stood there in the kitchen watching this and watching the body fluids
Right.
pool up for both of them, and the smell. And I it's like I was so cold. I didn't feel anything. I didn't think anything. I just watched as these two people bled out. And I didn't notice this with my stepmom, but I noticed this with my dad. And it was very, almost supernatural. I mean, I don't know how to interpret it, but it seemed as if I could see like his spirit leaving his body. That's just what it was like, you know. And there I was, I think I just turned 20 years old, and I was standing over their bodies, and it was just horrible. And then I started shaking, and I turned around. I forgot the pills up in my bedroom, and I grabbed a set of their car keys. They had a BMW, and I ran out of the house. I took the BMW, and I just drove away. And I was shaking, and I was like freaking out because of what I had just done. I threw the gun. I still had it with me. I threw it in the back seat of the Beamer. And I drove to a local grocery store, Jayant, and I went inside and I bought a box of sleeping pills, Sominex sleeping pills, and there are 48 pills in the box. And then I swung past like a McDonald's or something and got something to drink. And I remember the cashiers were trying to talk to me, but I couldn't hear them because I'd lost my hearing. I just like pushed money at them. And I drank, you know, whatever soda or water, and I took all 48 pills. And then I drove around towards an area called Columbia in Howard County, Maryland. And there was another Jayant, and I went into that Jayant grocery store, and I bought another box of Sominex sleeping pills, 48 of them. And I went back to the car, and I took all those. So I just taken 96 Sominex sleeping pills, and I just thought, I'm just going to take these pills, and hopefully that'll delete me. The problem is I didn't save one bullet for myself. Like I used them all in the crime. So I spent that very long night. I kind of passed out. I started tripping. I was tripping balls. Like I was hallucinating. It was crazy. And this just went on for hours and hours. I'd pass out and I'd wake up. I'd pass out. I'd wake up. I was hallucinating from taking all these pills. And that's how, and then the next morning I came to, I'd forgotten everything that happened the day before.
The pills they didn't
do it. They
just over the counter, just
over
wasn't
the counter.
enough.
What they did do is for about almost 2 months, I was just tripping,
Right.
like taking a lot of Larry, Sam, David.
Right. Okay. LSD.
LSD.
That's fine.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
But it's like taking a bunch of acid.
Yeah.
And I was gone. My brain was just fried, and that was nuts. I drove around. Once I came to, I drove around. I don't know what was real. I have a lot of memories of things I did. I won't get into all that, but eventually I was so tired and so fatigued, and I didn't know what was going on. So I drove back to my dad's house, and waiting outside were the camera crews, everybody in the entire neighborhood, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department, the state police.
So did someone hear the gunshots, or did someone come by the house?
So what happened is my mother discovered when I left, she had a bad feeling. After I'd stolen her gun and the pills,
Right.
She had a bad feeling. And she went to look to see where her gun was, and she saw that it was missing. And she just knew. So a few hours before I returned to the house, she had actually went over to my dad's house because she was afraid she thought I was going to kill myself. And she found the bodies. And it was horrible. And because they had been there overnight, and so the body fluids had separated out, it's like it was bad. And, and here I am, I drove up, and they had it on TV. This was highly, highly publicized in all the newspapers, on all the news stations on the East Coast and across the nation. The video footage was just crazy. Some neighborhood kids ran behind the car as I pulled up, because I guess they put out this APB that the son was driving around in the car. And so once I drove up and saw this stuff going on, I tried to back out of this cul-de-sac, this suburban area. I'm like, this looks crazy. I don't want to be around here. And the neighborhood kids ran behind the car to prevent me from backing up. And then the cops ran up and they had their Glocks pointed and the camera crew. And probably the only reason why I'm alive at this point is because the camera crew had those cameras right there pressed up to the windshield of the car while the cops had their weapons drawn. So they ended up removing me from the car. I didn't know, like I was so in shock. They, kind of carried me and dragged me into our house, sat me in the living room, took off all my clothes, swabbed my hands to look for gun residue.
Right.
And maybe they read me my rights. I don't remember completely because I was so half out of it. The detective, they had a specific detective assigned. He scooped me up. He got me into the car and he drove me away from there, drove me to the Montgomery County Jail Detention Center, MCDC. And that's where, part one ends.
Right.
And part two kind of ends. And then what happens afterwards. So what happens afterwards is I get put into the criminally intensive unit, the CIU. They also called it the crisis intervention unit. But they knew I was this high profile person. I just blabbed everything to the detective. And by the way, I had a microcassette tape recorder with me because I wanted to record my self-deletion note, for future posterity. And so they confiscated that, and I had it with me throughout the whole crime. And while I was driving around in the car afterwards, and I was rambling, and I was saying all this stuff that I did and making up poetry. It was like really crazy. So the detective played this tape, and he asked me all these questions. And, one thing I know now is it's called 456.
What's that?
The Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments. Fourth Amendment is, assert one's right to not be searched. The Fifth Amendment is keep one's mouth shut and do not answer any questions, do not cooperate verbally. And the Sixth Amendment is ask for a lawyer.
Right.
Answer no questions. I didn't know any of So, but I didn't know any of that back then. And I just blabbed everything. I told them the whole story, as well as a lot of the backstory with my parents. And, it was sort of like vomiting out my whole truth or whatever. So I was indicted. I received letters. They were going to give me double life plus 40 years, no parole. They're pretty strict. They wanted to just put me away. My parents were so high profile. But at the same time, this is 1991, the Menendez brothers, they committed their crimes in 89. I think on their first trial, they had a mistrial. They tried him again.
Yeah.
And at the same time as this, their second trial was happening in Beverly Hills. My incident happened in the East Coast, in Montgomery County, Maryland. And what all of I had public defenders. What they decided and cut a deal with the, prosecutor that they didn't want this to be such a huge spectacle because there was already the Menendez, it was already so high profile. They didn't want to have two of them going on at the same time, plus the David Brom thing that just wrapped up. And after they the police detectives went through my parents' house, what my public defenders told me is they found additional material that they didn't want to tell me what it was because they thought it would be really upsetting. But because of this additional material, they were able to go to the prosecuting attorney and cut a deal because of how, bad it would look and how bad it would make my parents look. Plus, they were so high profile, these high-ranking military people.
What are we assuming this is? Are we assuming these are photographs? Or?
It was probably photos, videos. I know they had an extensive collection of toys.
Right.
And probably more of that and maybe other stuff as well. I know both of them were taking psychiatric medicine at the time for depression and other things.
Right.
So
none of this is going to play out well during a trial.
Yeah, it's going to be ugly.
It supports more of your version than whatever the prosecutor could come up with.
It was bad. So the way they got to the deal, first, my public defender said we could take what's called the Alford plea, which on the East Coast means that there's a preponderance of evidence that suggests that I did the crime, but I can take the Alford plea, which is kind of like saying no contest and choosing not to plead guilty, even though there's an acknowledgement that the evidence is going to be
There's
go.
enough evidence to convict
Right.
me, but I'm not gonna
Right,
I'm
not
not gonna
gonna-
plead guilty because
right.
I don't think I did this. But I understand there's enough evidence that
that they're probably going to get me on that.
yeah.
So we talked about that. And meanwhile, I'm like still a little crazy. I couldn't decipher this. So I really put all my trust in the hands of my public defenders. In general, most people have a bad experience with public defenders.
Yeah.
Mine were phenomenal. They saved my life, truly
Right.
saved my life. Next, they started looking at what's called NCR, not criminally responsible. In Maryland, they don't have an insanity plea.
Right.
So they do not criminally responsible, which is basically saying, well, the person's not criminally responsible, so we're going to send them to a psychiatric facility for an indefinite period of time, and maybe the doctors will decide if the person is sane, possibly to be released. So they were going to send me to the same facility that John Hinckley, the guy who took a couple shots at Reagan and
Hit
think
him.
Brady too.
Oh, he hit Brady too.
Yeah. So Hinckley was at this place, a particular place called Clifton T. Perkins, basically the insane asylum.
Right.
But then the public defenders thought that my future of having the stigma, as if it's already not bad enough, because of horrible crimes, that the stigma of being considered mentally ill, reason him insanity, not criminally responsible. So they said, well, how about we plead to, because there's so much evidence for self-defense. That's really what they pushed. Mental illness, emotional illness, self-defense, fear for my life, plus a history of abuse, and they negotiated for second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder. And the prosecutor and the judge agreed to that, and I waived my right to have a jury trial. Instead, we would just have a judge trial, where the defense and prosecution would make their case, the judge would make a decision, and they offered me a deal for 100 years for 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of felony use of a handgun, where 30 years for each body and then 20 years no parole for each incident of using a handgun in the commission of a felony. And I was like, the weight, I still have the letters, the no parole letters framed in my office, and I just sit and I look at it sometimes. And then I have the documents that I signed to agree to 100 years, and I sit and I just look at that sometimes. The feeling of sitting with that it's like being suffocated. And as a 20-year-old kid, I turned 21 in jail, never took a legal drink in my life, even though I drank before. I even tried to make wine in prison, in jail.
Right.
Make it like jailhouse wine. Some of the other inmates taught me how to do it. But so crazy. But the lawyer, my public defender, said, take this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I told him I'm scared. I don't know if I can. They said, take this deal and just trust us that maybe I don't know if you've had this experience, Matt. There's a saying that it's better to have numbers than letters.
Right.
When people have letters, life,
Yeah.
it's just forever. It's indeterminate. But when you have numbers, sometimes you can work with numbers. Sometimes you can get a little play here and there, work the number down, cut a deal, get a little bonus, shave some time off, good time, all sorts of different things. And they said that would be my best shot. And maybe the judge might be willing to work with me at some point in the future.
Right.
And then what I found out later, and the reason why they picked this particular judge, is that he happened to have 2 twin daughters who were the same age as me. That's why they chose him as my judge. And he got it. Like he understood what was going on. So he sentenced me to 100 years. I signed the paper. They sent me to jail or sent me to prison.
Oh my God. 100 years. I get it, but Jesus, the weight of that.
21 years old because I turned 21 in jail. 100 years.
Where'd they send you? To a pen? They said to send you to a pen, right?
Yeah. So I sat in the detention center for like a few weeks while they were sorting things out. And then they sent me to the Maryland Division of Corrections penal system. First, they send people to this one facility called the Classification Center, very high security in the middle of Baltimore, where based on an inmate's background and their sentence and whatever other factors, they're given a classification. Do they go to minimum, medium, max?
Right.
And so I was classified for maximum security because of violent crimes, 100-year sentence. From there, I was there maybe a few weeks while they were doing the classification. My weight was I weighed over 300 pounds at the time because I was just like a wreck.
Right.
And then they sent me to my first prison, which was up in Hagerstown. So in Maryland, they have a lot of prisons. They're sort of half divided. Half of them are in Jessup. The other half are in Hagerstown. So first they sent me up to Hagerstown.
Why? Because they're small? Or they have a lot? Maryland's not huge.
Yeah, but Maryland has Baltimore City.
Okay.
And Maryland likes to lock people up.
Oh,
and,
okay.
and the drugs. And it's a big industry.
Right,
You know,
okay.
And at this point, you know, prisons are an industry. It's a machine for making money.
Right.
So more prisons, more strict drug laws and whatever, and more inmates, more money. So they sent me up to Hagerstown first. I get up to Hagerstown. I end up having conflict with the first guy they put me in a cell with. He was a offender. And I had this mentality where I had a lot of prejudice against offenders, pedos, and chomos. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I thought I have nothing to lose, and I'm going to have to make a name for myself. And every facility I go to, every time I find one of these guys, I'm going at them. And I'm just going to, like, if I get more, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to be the the whatever Avenger.
Yeah.
And, and just go with it, because this is what my life has come to. And there's no other option for me. So might as well just ride this down to the bitter end. And so I ended up getting put on ADSEG. And they told me I have to stay there until they transfer me to another prison, which they did after a couple weeks. And they sent me to a facility in Jessup, maximum security penitentiary called Patuxent Institution. And it turns out this was a facility that my public defenders had recommended I go to, because this was a maximum security penitentiary, but it also, and I've heard parts of your story, Matt. I'm kind of familiar. I've heard a lot of your podcast, and I'm a fan. By the way, it's why I chose you, right? You talked about this program called RDAP,
Yeah.
which is kind of like a behavior modification, cognitive therapy, peer pressure to get people to behave right. So imagine a maximum security penitentiary where people go through like an RDAP type program for 10 to 20 years in hopes, and they all have life sentences.
Right.
Like every one of them has the equivalent of life or multiple lives, and they're all high profile. And they've all done like heinous, nutso stuff. That's what this Patuxent Institution was like. So it wasn't entirely a mental institution, but it wasn't entirely a penitentiary. It was the worst of both.
Right.
But maybe the best of both. I don't know, but it was what it was. So that's where I got sent. And they're basically up in Hagerstown. They're like, come and get him. We don't want him here anymore. Come take him to Patuxent. And so they did. And I spent the last 10 years of my incarceration there.
Okay.
And that place was wild. They had a level system, like, you have to work your way up from level 1 to level 2, good behavior and so on. They had a lot of programs. As soon as I got there, I met a couple of really pivotal things happened. One, I met this guy named Ricky Sutton. Ricky, he's passed away now. He was an old head. You know about old heads, Matt? Old career criminals.
Right.
Been around a while. Ricky had committed murder and killed the parents of his spouse, so his in-laws.
Yeah.
A bunch of, like in the 70s. And he had double life plus 40 years, no parole. And, there was something about me, like I was this young guy, young, chubby, soft-looking kid, full of all this anger. And Ricky just saw something in me, and he's like, come here, man, I want to talk to you. And he told me his story, that he had done these crimes, he got sent to Patuxent, but he apparently he was a very smart guy, smart like yourself, I guess.
Okay.
And he figured out, through trial and error, how to navigate his way out of Patuxent. And what he did is he took all the vocational shops, he took all the education, he participated in group therapy, went to recovery meetings, anything they had, he did. And he did it in such a clever way that even with double life plus 40 years, no parole, after 4 years of incarceration in Patuxent, he managed to get parole. Because Patuxent, at the time, had their own unique parole board, separate from the rest of the Division of Corrections, so that they could make an individual decision about each of the inmates based on their progress through this RDAP type of program.
Right.
So we actually received parole hearings once a year, and we'd have to talk about What was our progress? What issues have we worked through? Have we made good use of our time? How have we rehabilitated? I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, Shawshank Redemption.
It's probably commented that and Gattaca are my two favorite. If I had, I don't have one.
Yeah. Remember where Reds goes for his parole hearing in the first early years?
Yeah.
So, sir, have you changed?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Changed everything.
Made a mistake.
Never do it again. I'm different now.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how we all played the game.
Yeah.
You know, once a year, I'm different. I'll never do it again. I've seen the error of my ways. I've changed every year. And the parole board would just be like, okay, good. Well, good luck. We'll see you next year.
Yeah.
Ricky had managed to figure out how to say all the right things, but he also did all the right things.
Right.
And he could back it up. And after 4 years, he got out. As soon as he got out, though, he relapsed and got violated for parole.
What do you mean relapse?
He started drinking.
Okay, well, I was going to say relapse to me is
he didn't pick up. Right. In his case, in his case, the booze always came before the gun.
Okay.
Right. So, the first thing first and then the second thing second. So he relapsed on the alcohol. They caught him at their halfway house. They pulled him back in. He stayed back in Patuxent for like another year and a half, worked the program, talked a good game, got paroled again. As soon as he got out, he violated again, alcohol again. He got pulled back in. This is a guy with double life. You figure he would, right?
Yeah, what?
Yeah. So this happened 4 times for him. Being released, getting pulled back in, getting released, pulled back in. He'd always, and I met him on his 4th return. Oh my God. And what he did is he said, Jay, I want to tell you how I got out. And he just wanted to download all of his learnings, all of his strategy. And he told me, simple formula. And by the way, if there's any guys who are locked up who are trying to figure out how do you work your way through the system, the secret is there is no secret.
Yeah.
There is no sneaky, secret way to do it. The way to do it is just to work the program, work the process, and really work it if you can. So I did all the shops. I did 5 or 6 vocational shops. I took college courses. I paid for college courses out of my own pocket through correspondence. I did volunteer work. I got involved with the recovery programs. I got clean and sober. I did all this stuff because he gave me the roadmap.
Right.
But at the same time, I had this sentence that just let me know, there's still no hope. What's the point of doing all this stuff and making all this change and being a better person and letting the activities I'm involved with change me to be a better person? Act your way into being whatever you're going to be, right?
Well, for the one thing is you'd be a better person.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Oops, I became a better person.
Even if I have to be a better person and do 100 years, then at least I'll be a decent human being after that.
But what's the point of being a better person if you're in a place like that?
I think it's everything.
It's everything. So I had the little angel and devil on my shoulder because in an environment like that, you have to be just bad enough to survive. But you want to be just good enough to not create more problems than what's really necessary. So every day was do I try to stay out of it and minimize getting involved in whatever's going on? Or is this one of those days where I have to get into the mix because sometimes you got to get your hands dirty in order to survive and go along with the program and to get respect of everybody else to not be considered weak. It was every day was trying to weigh that out. And still I didn't have any clear idea of when I'd be released. The next really powerful thing that happened was right around 1994. I'd been in there for about 2 years. Maybe a year and a half to 2 years. I had met a guy that I was going to the recovery meetings, and he was going as well. And we started talking outside, on the cell block and walking around the yard. And his name was Lucian. He was an older African-American guy. And he said, Jay, I can tell that you can have a different future. And you're trying to do all these things that Ricky's teaching you to it looks good on paper, and maybe it'll make me good at the end of the journey. But there's something that I'm gonna need to bring it all together. He said, I'm gonna need money because it's gonna be expensive to get out of prison with a sentence like that. And he said he had the answer to that. And he gave me a book called Think and Grow Rich
Okay.
by Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
And he insisted that we sit down and we read that book together. And that if I can absorb, I know this sounds, and there's another book. It's funny how this all pulls together. But like the weird serendipity that these events come together that absolutely change the whole trajectory of my life and open up these windows even when the world closed these doors on me. Like it's just phenomenal. So we talked about Think and Grow Rich. He almost made me memorize this damn book. And he said that if I can understand like how to utilize its strategies and principles, at some point I'm going to figure out how to start making some money. And that if I plant enough acorns over time, I'm going to have big acorn trees. And then at that point, I can cut down the trees and sell the wood and then use the money. This is a metaphor, but I can use the money to get out of prison. Right. So that happened. And then the third thing that happened was this guy got transferred in from Hagerstown, Lucky the Cannibal.
Lucky the Cannibal. Okay.
Yeah, his name was Lucky, and he was a cannibal. And he got transferred in. He was a tall guy. He was a Viking. Mm-hmm. If anybody's ever been in prison, you know what a Viking is.
Yeah.
This guy was rough. And
we interviewed a guy named Viking. Yeah, the Viking. Yeah.
Yeah. And he looked the part.
Yeah.
He looked like he would carve somebody up and eat him on the cell block just for looking wrong at him. So for a few weeks before that, I was reading some other book somebody had gave me called The Tao of Pooh, talking about Taoism and Eastern philosophy and surrendering and being at peace and meditating and just kind of like chilling out and not trying to force solutions, but letting solutions organically develop. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was just a bunch of bullshit. I'm reading this book. I'm like, this is the stupidest book I ever read. But it had a little symbol of the yin yang on the cover of the book. Mm-hmm. So just for the hell of it, I took it and I painted that on the wall of my cell. And I would just sit and I would look at that, this idea of this balance, you know, that inside of the evil, there's good. Inside of the good, there's evil, light and dark and everything. So Lucky the Cannibal gets transferred in. He walks past my cell, looks through the door, and we had solid steel doors with a glass window, looks through the door and sees the yin-yang symbol. He goes back to his cell, grabs a couple of books written by a guy named Bo Lozoff. And the main book was called We're All Doing Time. And he comes back and he throws the books in my cell. Never said a word to me. He just gave me these books. If I can take a quick journey, a little side story. So my connection to to Timothy Leary. So back in the 1950s, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert were two Harvard-trained psychiatrists and psychologists, and they got a hold of synthesizing mushroom pills, psilocybin. And Timothy Leary ran around the country giving people these pills, telling them to turn on, tune in, and drop out. And basically, it's the whole beginning of the psychedelic acid thing.
Right.
And because of this, Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary both got kicked out of Harvard. Dr. Richard Alpert, he decided, Timothy Leary's going a little crazy with this. And he had some, psychedelic experiences, but he took it in a different direction. And he felt called to go to India, where he met up with a guru named Neem Karoli Baba. And he sat at the foot of this guru, and this guru downloaded all this Buddhism and whatnot, teaching him the Dharma. About a year later, Richard Alpert has his name changed. His guru, Neem Karoli Baba, changes his name to Ram Dass, and then tells him to go back to the United States and start spreading the Dharma, which is basically a way of saying spread the truth or enlightenment or whatever about recovery, whatever that means to a person. So Ram Dass swears off of drugs, swears off of drinking. Meanwhile, Timothy Leary is having all these adventures, and Ram Dass comes back to the States and he starts traveling around like the Grateful Dead, talking about meditation as a path towards enlightenment and having some kind of personal, deep inner character change. And people start following him, just like the Deadheads follow the Grateful Dead around.
Right.
And two of the people that were following around Ram Dass were Bo Lozoff and his wife Sita. And Ram Dass gave Bo Lozoff and Sita a bunch of money to start this foundation to minister to inmates, to try to come in and teach them yoga, teach them how to meditate, teach them unconventional ways to access personal transformation. And Ram Dass had also written a real famous book called Be Here Now. really famous during the whole counterculture. So Bo Lozoff basically rewrites the book. It's called We're All Doing Time. And it's a book written for inmates saying, you know what, whatever your background is, how about you just consider meditation? Because that's the path that every mystic in every religion has gone through to connect with something greater than themselves. And it's the thing that every monk goes to the top of the mountain and sits in the cave, meditating on their belly button, to try to connect with whatever's out there. And so Bo Lozoff starts sending these free books to everybody. So Lucky got a copy of this book. Book comes into my hands. By the way, I ended up meeting Bo Lozoff years later. So I get this book, I start meditating. And, I got this Think and Grow Rich. I'm thinking about bigger financial schemes. How do I make money? Being inside prison. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to follow this plan that Ricky Sutton gave me on doing all the right things, all the right actions. And then this idea about meditate to connect with some greater inspiration. And all those things were coming together. And I was going to these recovery meetings. So it all kind of meshed, together pretty well. And then I had this experience in 1993, October 16th. And I was meditating really late at night after the cell block got really quiet. All the inmates would go to sleep, turn off all their TVs. So I'd wipe down my floor in my cell. I had a single cell because I would pay the clerks to keep my cell single.
Right.
We used to be able to, do those kind of hustles. So I'd clean up my cell, wipe down the floor. I'd put a towel down. I'd put a pillow down. And I'd sit down on my cell floor. And I'd just say, you know what? I'm at my lowest point. I'm going to die in prison. I have no clear path forward. But I have people who are believing in me, and I'm just going to meditate. And maybe if there's something out there, I don't know, or whatever. And I won't go into the long story, but I'll just say that I had an experience that night. And that experience, have you ever seen The Grinch That Stole Christmas? The cartoon, mm-hmm. The original cartoon?
Yeah.
Where the Grinch has all this rage and resentment towards Whoville,
mm-hmm.
and he goes down and he steals all their presents. And he puts it in his sleigh and he takes it up to the top of a mountain and he stands on the mountain and he's just about to dump all their presents over. And he's like gloating about, this will show them, and like show his anger at the world. And then something happens. And like spontaneously, he had this thing happen where his heart grew 4 sizes large.
Yeah.
And it's like he had this epiphany. And in that epiphany, like everything changed. And then he heard all the Who's singing down in Whoville, and their voice came up the mountain, and it was like it moved him, and he realized that the value of life is not about the presence.
Right.
Right. There's something transcendent. There's something greater than just him and his anger and the way community comes together. And it triggered something inside of him, and he had this realization, and he snatches all the sleigh with the presents, and he goes down, and he gives all the presents back. And then the community welcomes him back in.
Right.
And it's like, I felt like that happened that night. It seemed like my cell filled up with light, and something inside my heart changed. And I'm not saying I had a Jesus moment, because I'm not a Jesus person, right? But I'm saying something happened. I was meditating and I connected with something. And for the first time that I could ever remember, it's like I could feel my heart. And I felt something had changed. And I felt hope in my future. And I knew things might be different. I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew something could be different. And I just sat there with that feeling. And I just felt like all this hope. And I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, and that everything was going to be different. And then I crawled into my bunk. And then the next morning I woke up and I could still feel that feeling in my chest. And nothing else had changed.
How long had you been locked up at this point?
About 2 years-ish, okay. 2.5 years. And then from that point forward, I threw myself into working the RDAP program. I did everything. I had a job, shops, education, volunteering, anything they had, I was involved in, and getting my education. And then I started having these coincidental inspirations. I would go out to the day room and read the newspapers. We had the Baltimore Sun, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. And I would start reading the business section. So this is during the early 1990s at this point. And I'm reading the business section. And I start reading all these other magazines because I start thinking, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to get out. And I need to keep tabs on how the world is changing so I'll be ready to get back into it. Because it's, when I got locked up, there were no cell phones, there was no Starbucks, there was no internet. Like I went in before all that stuff. And, and eventually when I got out, like they have all this stuff and I'm like, oh my God, look at all this technology. This is crazy. So I'm sitting in prison, I'm reading all the business section of all these newspapers, and I start thinking about the different companies and the beginning of the internet age. And I'm saying, well, what companies are gonna, what's gonna happen? So I had this inspiration about this very small company that nobody really had ever heard of. They were making software that, that would be used on other computers. This weird guy who's a Harvard dropout named Bill Gates. Mm-hmm. And I had about $4,000 left over from college. So I make a phone call to a family member outside and say, take this $4,000 and buy this Microsoft stock for me and just put it there because maybe it'll be worth something someday. And then what happens is that did fairly well. And then I picked another company that nobody had ever really heard of. It's named after a piece of fruit,
right?
With a bite taken out of it. And I thought, let me buy some of that too. And then there was another company named after a rainforest, and they sold books over the internet. And I'm like, let me buy some of that too. And so for the next 8 or 9 years, up into 2000, I would just make trades and educate myself and read these newspapers and think about social trends and technology trends. I would read everything I could get my hands on, everything from Wired magazine to Vogue, Cosmo, Time magazine, Newsweek, whatever, all the newspapers. And I was making moves. And at the December of 1999, I had $250,000. I had built a portfolio of $250,000.
I mean, are those the only 3 stocks you bought, or did you buy other stocks?
Yeah, I bought others.
Okay,
yeah,
but those were the ones those were the big ones.
Yeah, that's how it started.
Right.
And then it, just kind of like, I think this and this, and and the more I paid attention, the more I saw the cross connections.
Right. Plus,
that Think and Grow Rich, it had me think along those lines of looking for opportunities and synergies. And I got to admit, like I'm not a super smart guy, but at least one of my parents was pretty smart. The other one had struggles, right? So I figured, let me just work with the little bit of that I have. And I also had some college education. Mm-hmm. And that together was a bigger advantage than most of the other guys I was locked up with. Have you ever had the experience of being the guy on the cell block that people call Google? Mm-hmm. Back then they didn't call me that, but go ask Jay.
Yeah. It was Ask a White Guy.
Yeah, Ask a White Guy.
Yeah.
So I was the white guy.
Yeah.
I'm sort of like tan. Ask the tan guy, right? And by the way, when I got into prison, I'd only had 2 fights while I was in that penitentiary, and both of them were with white guys.
Right.
Funny enough. And one of them was a new guy who just wanted to make show off or something. The other was this big white bodybuilder guy who was my cellmate. Mm-hmm. And then we became really good friends after we fought.
Right.
But what I found is with the shot callers, I never became a part of a gang, but I ended up becoming friends with all the shot callers because I realized it's a lot easier to make friends with the shot callers and then let their dictate trickle down than to try to make friends with everybody and hope it trickles up.
Right.
And the trick to becoming friends with the shot callers is providing value. Mm-hmm. I had artistic skills. I could make greeting cards. I could draw portraits. I could write poetry. And every guy wants to have something like that to mail out to his girl, right? I could do people's law work. I got a job in the law library doing people's law work. Like I helped one guy learn how to paint. I taught another guy how to read, wherever you could fill in the unmet need. Mm-hmm. And I learned about that. You look for the unmet need, you solve the problem that people have, but they don't realize it's a problem because they can't put it into words. But if you could back up far enough and sort of see it for what it is and have the first mover advantage, then, that's where opportunities come in. So that's what I started doing. And I just developed that mindset, looking for opportunities and building this portfolio. And then this thing happened in 2000 called Y2K. where everybody freaked out. They thought all the computer systems were going to shut down and everybody would lose their banking information, all this crazy stuff. And right after Y2K officially happened, the stock market crashed. And I lost 80% of what I had built. And I just panicked because I was like a one-trick pony. I was able to invest to build it. I just didn't know how to maintain it or to like move it around, especially when there's factors that, you know, influence the way the market works, right? Especially during volatile times. And then, so I just kind of sat with that. And then a year later in 2001, and by the way, in 2000, just before the stock market crashed, I was able to pay for some lawyers. And so I probably paid like several tens of $1,000s, right? This is back, you know, right around like 2000.
Right.
And they put together a package for me. And we had a plan to go back in front of my original sentencing judge, who was just about to retire from the bench. And they thought maybe we could do something. And there was a point with my original sentencing documents, the way that the judge wrote it out, they weren't exactly sure, like consecutive, concurrent, suspended, like how did you make sense of it? And the Division of Correction said, we're just going to take it as 100 years. But my public defenders kept saying, be cool,
right.
Don't just wait. There's something to this, and we're going to go back and let the judge clarify this. So in 2001, August, I went back, or I think it was June of 2001, I went back to court.
Right.
And when I went back to court, I got to see the original sentencing judge, and he let me just talk to him for like 35 minutes, everything I'd done. And one of the biggest things that Ricky Sutton had taught me is document everything that I do while I'm there and form a binder and make sure that judge gets every photocopy of everything I've done. And when I went in front of that judge, he reaches under his bench and pulls out this file like this thick. Boom, sits it on his desk. And he looks at it and he says, well, Jay, you've been a very busy man. Mm-hmm. And he opens it up. He saved everything. I used to send him Christmas cards.
You used to send, so you didn't present this with your motion. You'd been sending him stuff?
The whole time. Because Ricky Sutton told me to do that.
I haven't even written my judge a letter. I thought I've been contemplating writing my judge one letter, and
Yeah. The other thing Ricky told me, he said, Jay, no matter what you do, for as long as you're locked up, every 90 days you write your judge and you take a personal inventory. You tell him everything you're doing right. You tell him everything you're doing wrong. If you have a couple advances, if you have a few setbacks, everything you learned, be completely transparently honest. Let him see and be a part of the journey of growth. And every 90 days, for the whole time I was locked up, that's what I did. So he had all of those letters, including the Christmas cards that I would draw by hand, because I was like, boy, I was talking about being a suck up. Like right. I was just like doing whatever I could to, sort of ingratiate
yourself.
Right?
Yeah.
But, again, it's acting your way into becoming the person, right? And he saved everything. It was crazy. And he went through every single thing while I was there, asking me questions, and I was talking about it and talking about this whole journey. By that point, I had done 10 years, day for day. And we just went through all of this stuff. And then he let me talk just in general. And he said, and I told him this crazy story I had of this mystical meditation experience and how it changed my heart. And I felt like something inside of me had changed so deep that I knew I would, like, not just that Shawshank Redemption, oh, I've changed, oh, yeah, no, like I really knew I had changed. And at that point, I had been up for parole 9 times in the internal parole board and turned down every time. And after the first couple of times of doing that whole song and dance, oh, I've changed, oh, I'm different, blah, 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 I also had this realization where I told the parole board, when they asked me, am I different? I said, what I realize is I've become like the oyster, because inside the oyster, you have a pearl, but inside the pearl is a grain of sand. And no matter how big the pearl gets or how beautiful it gets, it always starts with a grain of sand, and that grain of sand is always going to be there. But the value of the pearl is all of the extra layers that have formed around it. Mm-hmm. So when the parole board started asking me, so are you different? I said, well, the problem is I'm still the same, but I'm more than who I used to be. I haven't changed into something different. I've grown into more than I used to be. And that felt like a really true statement. And I don't think they'd heard that before. But I tried to explain that to the judge. Like I felt like I was growing into becoming more. Like I still have that core of darkness, of rage and anger and wanting revenge and, Alaska Avenger and all this kind of like angry at pedos and chomos and get revenge and stuff at the core. But there's all these extra layers that have developed over the years where I realized, you know what, that kind of justice is not mine to be given or to act out on. It's not my place to be a vigilante.
Right.
I have to take a different type of path. And so I explained that. And after all of that was said and done, the judge looked at me and he said, well, let me clarify your sentence. We're going to run this together and run this and overlap this and this, that, and the other. And the end result is he gave me 15 years. So he took 100 years and knocked it down to 15.
Holy shit.
And the bulk of the 15 years was from the gun charges. So when you look at my sentence, even whatever it was originally, for the death of my father, no time. For the death of my stepmother, no time. I got penalized and punished for using the gun.
Using a gun.
Yeah.
And commissions of
And a commission of a felony,
And at that point, you'd done 10 years. So was there good time involved?
So there was good time involved. So then he says he was going to give me a judicial recommendation for parole.
Okay.
And he said that I'm welcome to take that recommendation from the bench, but that he was not going to set me free. The plan I'd put together with my lawyers was that I wanted to be set free and go through a halfway house. I had all of this stuff set up, treatment, to go through a very real transition, a healthy, safe transition to, get out, because I was institutionalized. I grew up in prison. But the judge said, you know what, we have a system in place for a reason, and sometime it might be broken, but it's the only system we have. So he told me, back to prison with you, Jay. But hopefully this recommendation for parole is going to serve you in some kind of way. And this adjustment to your sentence is going to serve you. And if you keep doing what you're doing, there's going to come a point where no wall or no cage is going to hold you, and you will eventually get out. But the rest is up to you. And he sent me back to prison. So that was like June of 2001. In August of 2001, myself and a bunch of other inmates and a couple of outside volunteers managed to organize the first ever convention, I'll just say, of Alcoholics Anonymous, held inside of a maximum security prison. And we had national speakers come in, and I got to be there to help organize that and be a part of it. The next month was September of 2001, and something happened up in New York, 9/11.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And the stock market crashed again, and I lost all my money again. But I lost it after I'd already had the opportunity to pay for the lawyers and get all this stuff with my sentence. The stock market and Wall Street stayed shut for 2 weeks, and everybody was freaking out. They locked down the penitentiary. I remember I was working in the sheet metal shop when they wheeled in the TV. They're like, you're not going to believe it. The first tower fell. And we watched in the sheet metal shop, in the welding shop, on this black and white TV, the plane go into the second tower. And I just thought, oh my God, how's the economy going to react to this? So what I did is I went up, after we were dismissed, I went back to the cell block and I pulled together all the inmates that I knew that were a little on the smart side. And I said, I want to put together a think tank, a mastermind of the smartest guys I know. And we needed to think about how's our economy going to react to this terrorist event. And so we met every day and we had a lot of discussion, and I took notes, and I was the only guy in the whole group that took notes, but I was using them to figure this out. And at the end of about a week or so of having these talks, I came up with a game plan, and I sold all of the remainder of my portfolio and rebalanced it, invested in all these other things, and that I thought based on how America's going to bounce back. And I ended up making like 70 to 80% of my money back.
Okay.
And then 3 months later, in March of 2002, on Good Friday, March 29, I walked out of prison because I had served about 11 years day for day, plus like 4.5, almost 5 years of good time for all the vocational shops and the college and the volunteering and all the keeping a job and staying out of trouble. I never got rid up. I probably should have gotten rid up a couple of times, but never got rid up. So I managed to do all that. And this whole time I was like working it from the back end without realizing it, while also having this plan to work it from the front end.
So you didn't get parole. You just timed out.
Well, like it ends up being mandatory parole. Timing out equals mandatory parole.
Okay.
In Maryland.
Yeah.
And so I go out on mandatory parole. I have 5 years of parole and probation where I have to see a therapist and, go to meetings and, do all the stuff, stay out of trouble, go to a recovery house, which I set up. And let me tell you, it was like phenomenal. For the first 6 months I was released, I was like a freaking celebrity in Baltimore because I had met so many people in the recovery community while I was in prison that as soon as I got out and started going to meetings, they're like, oh my God, this guy, come with us. And they would take me to meetings. And I swear I ate more steak in the first 6 months I was released because everybody wanted to take Jay out for a steak. It was like amazing.
Sorry. Was there a lot of media attention?
No.
Oh, nice.
So it was all super quiet because part of cutting the deal that I did was about trying to avoid the media attention and keeping everything as quiet as possible because of the Menendez brothers, who, since I got sentenced in April of 1992, they ended up going back and getting sentenced a little bit later in 1992. So again, our cases were neck and neck, as they were developing, except my case, everybody, all these professionals really suppressed it and kept it quiet and kind of slid me through the system. And even after I was released, everything was kept quiet, and even up to now. Like, this is the first time I'm going public. And part of the reason why is because after I got released, which was 23 years ago, I wanted to really exercise my muscles in trying to build like a normal person and just have that opportunity to rebuild. And I've been in contact with a few other people that I've met over the years who've had serious crimes. A few of them have had similar crimes to me. And what almost everybody wants to do is just be very quiet and just get into society, stay beneath the radar, blend in, not make waves or anything, avoid public visibility, which is completely understandable. And I did the same thing. I always picked jobs that I knew would not do background checks. And, I've had 3 jobs in corporate. My first job out of prison was as a bouncer. They didn't ask any questions.
Right.
But I navigated the system. I used every skill that I knew from prison, all my survival skills, my situational awareness, navigating with the money, trying to and when I was released, I had about $150,000 I walked out the door with. So for the first 3.5 years after I was let go, I didn't have to work.
Right.
Instead, I went back to school. I got my degree. I just focused on getting reacclimated to the world and going to meetings, meeting people, taking baby steps. And I never caused a problem. I never violated. I had 3 different probation officers. And on my last visit to the parole and probation officer, I brought her flowers and I wore a suit. Okay. And when I walked in the office, the guard who was posted said, he thought I was from like a civilian or something. Right. He's like, why are you here? Oh, I'm going to propose to her. All right. Really? You're going to propose? No. But I wanted to bring flowers just to kind of make an impression and to say thank you. Because they not everybody gets that kind of treatment from their POs. Right. But they treated me good. I never gave them a reason to treat me bad. Yeah. And really, they treated me so good. And I did all the right things and I was able to get out. And that's what I did. I just worked it, and invested and saved. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. And I just steadily worked. And first I got, after the bouncer job, then I got a job working at the largest organic grocery store chain that, is whole, full of foods. Right. And so I worked for them for about 14 years until they were purchased by one of the companies that is named after the rainforest that sold books, but now they sell a whole lot more. Mm-hmm. They purchased it. So I ended up working for them for about, 2 or 3 years. And then I got recruited to work for an electric car company for a guy who builds rockets and electric cars. And the thing about every one of those companies is that they're felon friendly.
Right.
They didn't do, I mean, the electric car company, I worked for him for about 6 years. And I retired last year when we had a corporate restructuring and about 22% of the workforce got let go.
Okay.
But I took that as an opportunity to retire. And, you know, in the 2 corporate jobs I had before then, I'd worked my way up, you know, like team leader and, you know, was buying company stock and saving and everything, trying to rebuild my life. And I always lived in fear. What if somebody finds out about me?
Oh, really? No. So nobody knows?
So the whole time, because of my demeanor, how I can present myself, how I can
People
talk.
only think you were in prison.
Yeah, nobody thought that.
Yeah. I meet people, I talk to them and everything, and then, you know, whatever.
Right.
When they eventually figure it out or it comes up, they're like,
Right.
I would have never thought you were in prison.
Right. And that's what I had. I think there are a few people from time to time that Googled my name
Right.
and it came up with something, but you know, either they kept it to themselves or it was always in hushed whispers.
Right.
Because to bring something like that up in the corporate work, they would get fired, you know, for harassment and stuff. So I just played ignorant, like, I don't know what you're talking about. I feel sorry for that guy, you know, but I'm out here, I'm doing my thing, you know, I don't know anything about that. So I just pretty much played dumb. But I always lived in fear. What if they find out? What if they find out about my background? And I always carried that into relationships too. And it was kind of difficult with dating, you know, wanting to connect with people, wanting to like develop that side of my life, but staying out of relationships, at least for the first couple of years, because that's always been a thing that caused people to go back into prison. Either relapsing on drugs and alcohol, getting into relationships too early, not knowing how to handle their anger, not knowing how to handle anxiety, or not knowing how to handle stress. Like, it's always one of those things that causes people to, you know, get back into recidivism. And I had training in all of those, like, you know, because I had all these people teaching me all these skills. So my goal was just to be super, you know, as successful as I could to make of my life what I could with what I have left of it. And then I got recruited to work for the electric car company. And that was the first time that I ever was completely honest. I walked in, I told them pretty much everything.
Right.
I didn't go into details about my victims, but I told them, you know, like, I'm coming to you at this point. I have like 20 plus years clean and sober. I've left that behind. I have great work history, a great work ethic. I love the company. I believe in the mission. I've tracked its history. I also had bought stock in that company
Right.
at the IPO. And so I'd been tracking it for a long time and was a big fan of Elon and everything. And on the strength of that presentation, they said, you know, it's important to have friends in high places, but it's also important to have friends in low places. And they said, we think we might have a job for a guy like you, a guy who can get things done.
What what was your degree in?
Sure.
And what was and what are what's the job you're doing for these guys, for these companies?
Sure. So I ended up, I had a bunch of credits already, like halfway to a degree before I got locked up.
Right.
And once I got out, I didn't know what to make of that degree. So I just went to the local community college, Baltimore County Community College. I said, help me figure this out. And they said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Take these courses, take these classes, and we'll put it together. So I got a degree in general studies,
Okay.
but with a specialization in applied sociology, because I was so curious about studying how groups of people behave, and mostly about how the market behaves, you know, looking for the trends. Because if you understand in general how people behave and what's probably going to be their next move, it's almost like social engineering, but trying to predict, you know, if they do this, then the market will do this. That means I should invest in this. So I really had an interest in doing that.
And what were you doing for Tesla?
So when I worked for them, I started off as a delivery experience specialist. And what that meant, this is back in 2018, when this is before they really blew up. They had just come up with the Model 3, where Elon was sleeping in the factory for 3 years straight.
If you sleep hot at night, you know how disruptive that can be. Whether you're having trouble falling asleep, you're waking up sweating in the middle of the night, or all of the above. That's where GhostBed can help. As the makers of the coolest beds in the world, GhostBed is your go-to for cooling mattresses, cooling pillows, and cooling bedding. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts to your body's temperature, every Ghost Bed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips or a firm option with exceptional support, your Ghost Bed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. When you purchase a Ghost Bed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. You can try out your mattress for 101 nights, risk-free, to make sure it's the right fit for you. Plus, they offer free shipping, and most items are shipped within 24 hours. If you're not sure which Ghost Bed is right for you, check out their mattress quiz. You'll answer a few questions and get a personalized recommendation. Even better, our listeners will get 10% off for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/Cox and use code Cox at the checkout. That's ghostbed.com/Cox and use code Cox for 10% off site-wide.
There's all these crazy stories. And this was the car that was going to either make or break the company. And so they had just come out with the Model 3. So they hired me just before that in anticipation of this brand new model, the affordable sedan that's everybody's going to buy and give up their gas cars. And so they trained me to walk people around, teach them how to use the car, deliver the car to their home, take the car to schools, especially STEM schools to teach, it's the same principle that McDonald's uses with their Happy Meals. You get them when they're young kids and get them to identify and develop all these good feelings with the brand. And then as they get older,
they keep buying
it, right? So to do all this stuff, and then as part of that, I had to get a sales license. So I'm still actively licensed to sell Tesla in the state of Maryland. And I had to go through the whole criminal background check. And you know what? I passed.
Yeah.
In all these things, I've never had any of maybe it's just because it happened 35 years ago.
Right.
But I've been able to pass every criminal background check. I've been able to travel internationally. I haven't even got into that. I've had 2 passports. I had a passport for another country, India. I've traveled all over the world. And so far, the only countries that ban me are Japan and Australia and Canada, because they have active policies in place that prevent U.S. felons from visiting or going through immigration. But all the Schengen countries, the countries that adhere to the Schengen Agreement, mostly Europe, they have a unified immigration system where if you go into one country, you don't have to keep going through immigration in the others. It's you go into one and then the others are okay, you're good. You can, and then just travel through all of those. But anyways, I got a sales license with Tesla. I learned how to repair the cars. I did home deliveries. I did education. And this is a great story. I'd love to tell you this. So from 2018 to 2019, I worked for Whole Foods / Amazon. I called them A-Hole at that point, or Holazon. I preferred A-Hole, and also Tesla. So I worked for both companies full time from 2018 to 2019. I would work 36 hours at Whole Foods / Amazon and then go work 40 hours at Tesla for a whole year because I didn't want to let go of one until I knew the other was secure.
Right.
Because Tesla was still kind of shaky back then. And then in September of 2019, when all of my stock from Whole Foods turned into Amazon stock invested, I walked into Whole Foods that day and I said, see ya. Because I knew everything invested. I wasn't going to leave any money on the table. And I left Whole Foods behind and I went straight to Tesla. I said, I'm ready to do overtime.
Right.
Give me as much as you got. And then a few months go by and then we have COVID-19.
Right.
And all of Maryland shut down on March 15 of 2020, except certain companies or businesses that were considered essential workers, which included some car dealerships, especially the service-related side, because people still needed to get their cars. So Tesla was allowed to stay open, but all of the entire staff of that Tesla location in Baltimore, Owings Mills, they left. They're like, see ya. And everybody was going on unemployment and getting the stimulus checks and not working. And I had, as I was transitioning out of Whole Foods, Amazon, I had let go of my apartment and built a tiny home and did the whole van life thing because I was thinking, I want to save money. And my job at Whole Foods, Amazon with the merger and acquisition, not very secure. So I'm just going to do van life for a while. So I was living out of a tiny home / van that I'd converted into an RV, but it was stealth. had solar panels on the top, and I had all this technical knowledge from
What
all
do you
the
mean stealth? What's stealth mean?
So stealth means that
You couldn't tell?
you couldn't tell.
Okay.
Yeah, you just look at it.
Just
It's
looks like a fucking van.
just a GMC Chevy Express 2500 plain vanilla van. You wouldn't know unless you look at the roof rack and see the 5 solar panels on the top and then the wiring going in. And on the inside, I had a security system, a 50-inch 3D LED TV, a PlayStation, bunk bed, 2 TVs, a couple Apple. I mean, I just had it all tricked out. But you'd never know. I learned it on YouTube. I saw somebody do it, and I said, that sounds like, that's
I
just
see these guys. Yeah,
yeah, it's just crazy. So I thought, what the hell? I'm getting older, and I've gotten out of prison, so let me just do some cool stuff just because. And and if the whole Amazon Whole Foods thing shits the bed because they were laying off people left and right, especially the people who'd been there for a while, I was like, well, my job might not be as secure, so I can live cheap. I know how to live cheap. All I need is 3 hots and a cot.
Right.
I know how to deal with that. Maybe you know a little bit about that too.
I could live off of granola bars
And a ramen noodle soup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a little hot water and you're good. Maybe a stinger. Yeah, it's all good. So I figured this out. So I had the van, and I also had a Lexus SC430 convertible.
Okay.
So living out of this tiny home converted van, and then driving this convertible Lexus, which was like my toy car.
Right.
That I was driving around. It's Jay can't be in it because he's got the Lexus, right?
Yeah.
And then when they locked down the state of Maryland, what I did the day that they locked down Maryland is I brought my van and I parked it behind the service center of Tesla in Baltimore, and I stayed there for 2 years on site, just like Elon did in the factory.
Right.
And I lived at Tesla for 2 years.
Did they not realize that?
They didn't care
Okay.
because everybody had left the facility.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I was on reasonably good terms with the managers, and the managers kind of figured it out, but they realized all these kids were stealing cars
Yeah,
off.
this is on-site security.
On-site,
like what?
exactly. And so they said, Jay, here's the keys to the building, and here's the keys to this, keys to that. Here are the phone numbers you need. You just take care of us, and we'll take care of you. And they took good care of me, and I got paid well, and I bought a lot of stock and whatnot, and I spent 2 years living on site at Tesla, just like Elon did when he lived in the factory, and I kept that place secure, and I did checks and had to call the police when I had to call the police, and I repaired cars when people would bring in their cars, and I sold cars, and I drove cars to people's houses during COVID, wearing a mask and gloves because they were afraid to leave their home. Like I did everything that Tesla needed because I believed, so deeply in the company and the mission and everything.
Right.
And I wanted to be like Elon, prove myself, work my way up because it's all about loyalty with this guy.
Right.
Like loyalty and dedication to the cause. And I just worked my butt off, around the clock, 7 days a week. And after about 2 years, then they opened things up. Everybody came back, and then my role shifted. And so I had more of like an auxiliary role where I could flex around. I was very cross-trained. I could do a lot of different things. And so mostly I just did whatever was needed and tried to show up and focus on what can I do to make this place better? What can I do to advance the cause, sell more cars, get people to switch to electric, like whatever, and save money and put money away. And in the process of that, I'm like, well, now that everybody's back in the facility, I don't need to live back here. So I disassembled the whole van, donated a whole bunch of stuff, gave away a bunch of stuff, sold the solar panels, and then I bought a condo for cash. And, so I lived 4 miles away from the location, and a condo was paid for in cash. I had 2 Teslas, 2 Model 3s, because the car is amazing. Mm-hmm. Just a pitch, but I worked on the car, so I know, right? And I got to be with the company all the way up to the launch of the Cybertruck. So I got to see the Model Ys and the, Raven vehicles and the ludicrous mode and like all this crazy technology and the self-driving. And I got to be a part of that, and I got to have my voice heard. I got to email a little bit back and forth with Elon. I never got to meet him personally. Mm-hmm. I'd like to be able to do that, just throwing it out to the universe. But if that never happens, I got 5 degrees of separation from Elon. Mm-hmm. Like I could look through the corporate tree to trace 5 people away how far I was from Elon. And Elon was always really good at like sending messages to everybody about, do this, don't do that, and stop screwing up, and blah, blah, we need to change the company and whatever. So I'm very grateful. I was also thinking about leaving the company just because, I'm getting older, in my mid-50s, and Tesla's a very demanding company. And I wanted an exit strategy. I just didn't know how it was going to happen, but I hung in there. And then Elon did some restructuring back April of last year. On April 15th, tax day, laid off 22% of the workforce. And I was lucky enough to be one of the people who got let go.
Okay.
And so I got to take a couple of months to just get my head together. I spent a lot of time traveling back and forth to New York, because New York, Manhattan has always been a place where I've been able to figure out my next step. And I started hearing some ideas about traveling, bucket list stuff. Because here I am, I'm in my mid-50s, I'm free now, I have a little bit of money to work with. I should, carpe diem, seize the day. So I travel, I get an updated passport, I travel overseas, I go to like Iceland and Netherlands and Germany and Switzerland and France and England, London, Ireland, did all this stuff. And for 2 months, just backpacked all throughout, and then came back to the United States and started thinking like, what do I do next? And I was meditating a lot, saying, what is my purpose in the universe? Because for a person, I guess like me, who can be very driven and is very purpose-driven and comes from, a family line of driven, high achiever and very intense people, and I still have that addictive drive, I just know how to point it in the direction of more productive things. And I got this idea that if there's anything I can do because of how blessed my life has been and all the second chances I've had, I always feel like the tears are going to come again. But like I've had this chance to like reinvent myself and have all of these experiences, and the whole time to stay anonymous. So I've never had people bully me because of my background or diminish me because of the things I did when I was a kid. I started taking more risks when I was going to meetings, sharing a little bit more openly, and became a circuit speaker for a certain fellowship. I also had the opportunity to help establish another fellowship, which I'm very involved with, and maybe we'll give a shout out to at some point. They could see it when they do the socials. And I got this message back in meditation where I saw this image of myself and the Menendez brothers on the Joe Rogan podcast in my mind. And I thought, knowing that at that time they were still trying to go back to court, and the David Brom thing was still sort of percolating. He was trying to figure out his situation. I was thinking, I'm the one who got all these breaks. Like it worked out for, and I worked for it too.
Right.
Like I really earned it, right? It wasn't just, it was a gift that I also earned. And I thought I wouldn't feel peace and closure until I found some kind of way to help the Menendez brothers, and also in some send out good ripples or karma or something for David Brown, but mainly for the Menendez brothers, because our cases happened at the same time. If there's anything I can do to help, move them forward.
Well, I would think you could you could start by writing them a letter. You know where they are.
So
they're going to get it.
So I got their information.
Oh, okay.
I visited a lawyer. And also, by the way, I also had this idea. The only other closure in my personal case is to try to get a pardon, whether gubernatorial or presidential. And I visited a lawyer and we talked about it. And normally people in the state of Maryland get a gubernatorial pardon.
Yeah.
It's not an expungement, but it clears the way because international laws are tightening up so that people with criminal backgrounds and the way they share computerized information, it's going to be even less easy to travel internationally. So I was thinking ahead, like how can I try to clear as much more as I can, because I love to travel and I want to experience more of the world, right? It's a lot different from living in a little 6x9 cubicle. Now I have the world available. So I think it sure would be nice to have something that cleared this last piece of debris from my background to really give me that sense of freedom to move forward. So I visited the lawyer, and the lawyer said, well, you're either going to need a gubernatorial pardon. And then she said, well, how much money do you have and who do you know? Because it's about favors and who you know and campaign contributions and whatnot. And she said the other way to do it is presidential. And we know how that looks, how that That's a little bit
I don't know how you could get a presidential pardon for
campaign contributions and who you know.
I'm saying for a state crime.
Because they're the felony charges.
Okay.
Anyways,
lawyer
just to say,
said-
the lawyer
okay.
said, yeah, that's what
Okay.
it's going to take. You know, it's one of those two avenues. So I said, well, God, I don't have that kind of money.
Right.
I don't have $1 million to just donate to somebody's campaign,
Right.
and I don't have favors like that I can pull. I'm still trying to build my network, you know, getting out and just trying to, you know, put good energy out and hope it comes back to me in some kind of way. So then she says, well, the Menendez brothers are trying to get out and they're well connected. Is there any way you can help their cause? And maybe that could come back around to help me out at some point. So a little quid pro quo.
Right.
So I write the legal team of the Menendez brothers. I get it's on TV. Well, I research it. I get the information, and I contact their legal team, and I get and I outline my background and the value that maybe I could add or something or whatever that might look like for them. Basically, put myself at their disposal, and I get back a polite, automated letter that says, well, thanks for that, and we'll keep it in mind, and maybe if we figure something out, then we'll get in touch with you. But, thanks for showing interest. So I'm like, okay, well, at least I'll just try to put good vibes out and meditate and figure out what happens next. And they go and have a couple of court hearings over the past couple months. And I think back in April, they go and they have their hearing and they have their sentence, which was double life. They each had double life, but it was running concurrently. So that it just looked like regular life.
Right.
But they had that vacated under this teen law, the youthful offender thing. And their life got turned into 50 years. So they were given 25 years for each of their parents, each. Mm-hmm. And they were run consecutively. So they each have 50 years. But since they've done about 37 years day for day, plus maybe 7 years of good time, that puts them at like 42 years on 50, which means they're eligible for parole. And they're going up for parole in 3 weeks, in like August 20th, 21st. So I'm saying to myself, wow, good on them. And maybe at some point I can put my story out there that it won't affect the outcome of their situation, but maybe it can affect the community and how the community receives them. Because my focus isn't so much on preventing parricide, because I can't really do that. That's such a complicated issue. But I can really speak to what happens after parricide. Like, how does a person cope with everything after the fact? How do they rebuild? How do they change themselves? How do they heal? How do they get themselves back into the community? And what kind of good things can they do to change to make it better for the next generation? And I thought maybe that's what I can do. And I had that meditation where I thought, podcast, maybe get my voice out there, that I was willing to break my anonymity and face the wrath of public scrutiny and being judged because of the things I did as a child or what I was involved in and my crimes and whatever. And I thought, sometimes things are more important because every person's story is somebody else's medicine. And if people don't talk up, if they don't speak up, then nobody knows. And I spent so much of my life perpetuating the abuse because I kept my mouth shut. And I did, like this whole don't snitch on your family, don't snitch on your parents. And the people who don't want you to snitch are usually the criminals who are doing the things that they don't want to get snitched on. I don't know if you can relate on being in that position and having to make a judgment call to kind of weigh out what's the bigger issue here and where is there more value, even if there's a small sacrifice at the beginning, that maybe it'll open up possibilities on the back end. And I really got this sense that I felt very at peace with, and I really had to work with it, that it would be worth it to put my story out there. And then I thought, okay, where do I start? And that's when I thought, I saw your video, because I watched your videos. But watching one of your videos, the light bulb went over my head. I'm like, oh, the solution is in my backyard, right underneath my nose. I got to talk to Matt Cox. I got to come on this podcast, because what I got from that meditation is that I want my story to impact your story and your channel. And maybe it'll all work itself out to create some positive waves to help them, to help you, but also to give closure to me. that I've finally been able to really tell the full story, including all this ugly stuff that I purposely kept to myself because I didn't want to rock the boat or be judged or whatever. And I thought, well, you know, Matt Cox ain't going to judge me because he's a scoundrel.
Right.
But he's getting better.
Right.
And he's made a lot of changes. And I see in you that you had your own Grinch moment, more like a series of small Grinch moments, you know? And then sometimes it happens fast and it's very intense. And sometimes it happens slow, like you boil a frog, a little bit at a time, but eventually you act your way into becoming a different person. And that different person creates incredible changes in the world. Big levers move big, small levers move big doors, you know? And everybody's story is somebody else's medicine. So I know you can change the world with this podcast. Even that, it might not look like that on the surface, but you're holding space and facilitating this opportunity for people to tell their stories in a way that only you can hold the space because you've been through stuff and there's a seed, a grain of sand inside of you, this grain of darkness, but there's also a lot of layers of who you are building yourself into. And that's also the kind of person I am. And I wanted to choose you because I knew that we share that. And in my own way, I do the same thing that you're doing here. I just do it in a different venue where I've held space while other people have told me their stories. And I thought, you know what? You're the person who can hold my story.
Do you have any place you want people to go?
Yeah, I have 2 websites that I'd like to invite our audience to check out. The first is called financialua.org. It's a 12-step program for recovering alcoholics and addicts who are ready to rehabilitate their finances and do a complete financial overhaul the same way I was able to do. And the second website is called afterparricide.com. And it's a website dedicated to helping people figure out what happens after they commit parricide, especially once they are out of the correctional system and want to reintegrate back into society. So feel free to visit there.
Hey, you guys, I appreciate you watching. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. We're also going to leave both of those links in the description box. You just go there, click on them. It'll shoot you over. See ya.